And hello, everybody, and welcome to our second broadcast of Caribbean Developer Week 2018. Hashtag we need to talk, hashtag Caribbean
And
Developer
hello,
Week.
everybody, and welcome to us.
Wow, imagine that. Is that an
2018.
echo?
Hashtag we need to talk. Hashtag Caribbean Developer Week. And hello, everybody, and welcome to us.
Okay,
Wow,
I actually thought that echo was me. It is me.
Hashtag.
My apologies, folks. I forgot to mute the video. But in any case, welcome to Caribbean Developer Week 2018. This is our second broadcast, making games with Phaser 3. I'm your host today, Lasana Murray. I am a software solution architect at Quink Technologies, a company based in Trinidad and Tobago. But I am not the person of interest here today. Today we have Marcus Sanatan, a good friend of mine, who is going to be giving us a quick demonstration of making games in Phaser 3. So let me just tell a little bit about Marcus before I bring him out. Um, his bio goes as follows. You might find it quite interesting. When you get into computer science, because of Mega Man X and Battle Network, you'll end up making games. I loved video games growing up, decided to learn programming in hopes of making them, and studied till I became competent enough to mine no call by references from my call by values. Okay, that's a reference to some programming stuff there. My studies were broadly in AI. My career has taken me from government policy to server maintenance, server side development, and beyond. I am no game developer, but I have fun with it and I see tremendous growth opportunity in the region. Last and certainly not least, I am a strong believer in the uses of open source software and open data to create a fairer, more transparent society. Interesting. Welcome aboard, Marcus.
Thank you for that introduction, Lasana Murray. So hello everyone. My name is Marcus Sanatan. Give me one quick second to set some stuff up. Presentation.
Sure, no problem. So what you? Sorry, you ready?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. So I was gonna say, while you do that, I'm gonna just basically show my ignorance of Phaser 3. Oftentimes Marcus would be experimenting with HTML5 canvas stuff and whatnot, and he would share like some of the links of the things that he's just playing around with, which to me is still amazing. I think partially because my background in software development, I kind of always look at game developers as basically the gods of software development. So, just anything interesting going on in that field, even though I'm not a game developer, I find myself often kind of paying attention to what people are doing, the techniques. There's a lot of stuff in there, and it just always seems so awesome, right? So, the Phaser stuff, I know he mentioned it to me not too long ago, actually. It's like a framework of sorts, or probably a library that allows for some game-related fancy stuff in JavaScript that you'll explain to us. It's open source, I believe, right, Marcus?
Yeah, you're taking all my thunder, but yeah, it is open source for sure.
Yeah, we'll take the thunder and roll with it.
Thanks. Okay, so put my screen share on, and let's get it. To be able to do web development and not know how to use Google Drive.
Oh, okay.
All right. So, everyone, once again, Marcus Sanatan going to this presentation about making games with Phaser 3. This is the first session of Caribbean Developer Week, so I want to thank Lasana Marie and Natalie O'Brien, especially, and Caribbean developers for hosting this and allowing me to just share how cool I think this framework is. So I am Marcus Sanatan, as mentioned before. Hope you guys got that information by now. I am not a game developer. So as Lasana previously mentioned, I'm a server-side developer at the company I work for, Wipala, based in Trinidad and Tobago as well. But I do really love games, so it's probably my favorite leisure time outside social activities, and I can play games till kingdom come. And as a programmer, you're always looking for interesting things to do. So why not make games as well, right? So this kind of session, I'm just going to kind of talk about, why us in the Caribbean could be interested in game development. Just like a brief bit, go and talk about like the state of game development on the web, probably the biggest console there is. And actually, if all things go well, we're going to make a game and have fun with it, right? So yeah, demonstrations never work out how we intended to, and I have a knack for finding horrible bugs, but let's have some fun making this game. So, like, you're probably thinking, and a lot of people in the Caribbean, maybe not the technologists, but the general attitude we have in the region, we're not too sure we can do what we see outside. But I think there are a lot of positive signs for us to generally look at game development as a way to use our skills and bring about new industries and just be fulfilled and happy people. So in the games, I think some key games were like Super Meat Boy, Braid, Bastion, Fez. When those games really kicked off, they always were indie games, but I think the renaissance really picked up when those games kicked off, I believe, around mid 2000s. And ever since then, indie games have been taken off to like new levels. There are a lot more indie game developers. Large companies do games of that indie style. For example, Child of Light by Ubisoft Montreal, and just literally have a lot of resources and lots of tools to make indie games. So like, there's a platform called HIO, and there's literally the world of indie games and the environment for it is the best there's ever been in a very long time. So we should probably jump in it and see where it takes us. Then we also have the casual game movement. So I never played Candy Crush, but I acknowledge its cultural impact it made, unfortunately. And a lot of games, Temple Run was a major one. One of the first largest selling iPhone apps when apps now came out was, I think, an arrow game. He got $1 million from a game shooting arrows while running, I believe. So there's the kind of advent of casual games, I think, really kicked off with mobile devices and smartphones. And even on the large console making side, Nintendo Wii was kind of like a nod to the prevalence and the success of how casual games could bring in so much people into the market. So that really is a large market there for games, those type of games. And I think that Phaser could really help push those through. A lot of if you look at a lot of where we get funding from international agencies, we do see a lot of funding going into animation, especially, for example, in Jamaica, they got a lot of programs to encourage more animators to be taught and have a place to work. And we that's relatively new in Trinidad and Tobago as well. I also saw some work from St. Lucia and Dominica, which is really promising. So animation in the Caribbean is actually getting bigger and bigger, to the point where at sixth form, there's an animation syllabus. You can actually learn some level of animation as a sixth form student in the region. So the prevalence of animation is growing, and that's a great thing. And we really could tap into those skills and kind of give them a next avenue, just the animation side, but the kind of interaction side of it. So games kind of includes animation. We could leverage the skills that we are putting our effort into and the skills that we have right now. And I always say that, for like I take public transport in Trinidad, and I feel I could be a novelist. The kind of characters I meet when I travel through the region, it's just something so special and unique about our people, our colonial history, the folk tales that we have, the cultures. We have real stories that we can tell that are just very unique to our region. So when you put on your PS4, play a game, why don't you hear a story that you can relate to? Because you're a native of this region. So I think we could actually pivot that market and get our own stories and things that relate to us on the same platforms that we use. Then we have lots of stories to share. So, that's games is like, for me, one of the best way to tell stories. It's like the merging of the artistic side of and creativity, and then the kind of scientific and engineering and software development. It's like a perfect merging of creativity and science and technology. Cool. So I think it would be unfair to talk about game development on the web and not mention Flash. So to be quite honest, I never used Flash before. Probably cursory, a couple examples. Action script seemed pretty cool. Had a lot of games came out of it, and I had a lot of fun playing them. And there are also some other times like Java applets and probably Silverlight, but Flash was like the real big thing to make interactive experiences on the web and games for a very long time on the web. And what slowly started to happen was that Flash and generally proprietary software was being frowned upon because of probably a lot of security bugs amongst other issues, and the idea of the web being open, and really the advent of HTML5, where we really started to dwindle all the proprietary platforms and focus on shared standards and what's available. So when HTML5 came out, I was 2000% on the hype train. I legit loved it. Literally, HTML5 is not just the markup language improving, it also included some CSS features and JavaScript features. It's like an amalgamation of web technologies, the intersection between them and what they want to do. So a lot of the things from HTML5 were a lot of times influenced by Flash developers and developers who may use Flash on other proprietary software and be like, well, I don't want to just lose these features for the sake of standards. I want to have the same thing that I had before. And rightly so, the tool should be adequate enough to do it. So with HTML5, they included the Canvas API, which allows you to draw pixels on the screen, WebGL, which is a kind of, I believe, a translation of OpenGL ES. So you can get kind of 3D graphics and really amazing graphical competitions on the web. They also had the audio API, the audio tags first, and then web audio came on properly later on. And to the point where HTML 5.1, I believe, had the gamepad API. So you can natively use your joysticks with JavaScript. It's completely crazy. Lasana mentioned before that I did some things before. I like to know how things work under the hood. So the first few games I made, I definitely went into Canvas and tried it out and let it jump. And it's actually a very easy, formal way to make games on the web. You can do that. You can 100% use the native HTML5 APIs and make games. But boy, I can tell you, it's a lot of work. And Phaser is a really good game framework which solves a lot of those problems. So Phaser essentially sits on top all those standard HTML5 APIs, and it also adds some really cool things like the game loop. So instead of having to code how to pull for data and how to render, Phaser handle all those things for you. One of the things I love about Phaser is the physics engine. So it literally handles collisions and bodies and gravity and these really cool features. So you don't have to code yourself. And all for a 2D game, it might be simple to do some physics. For 3D games, a physics engine for 3D is pretty hard. So you probably want to leverage all the help you can get. And what I really like about Phaser is how easy it is to kind of get through to it. So this conversation is really about Phaser version 3. Version 3 is like the massive refresh of the API. Version 2 has been around for probably 3 or 4 years, and version 2 was excellent. A lot of things I've done with HTML5 games with that. I have a lot of great examples and companies using it. Version 3 decided to make the API so much more cleaner. The documentation has caught up quite a lot, and it's really the code quality, the source code, debugging is a lot better with version 3. A lot of things like song management has improved, managing large spikes on your screen has improved. So definitely, if you're coming into Phaser, especially from this presentation, go into version 3. Don't worry about version 2. It's supported if you had a project using it, but definitely go into version 3. And luckily, the code feels the same way. It feels like you're still programming in Phaser, even though it's a different version of your library and it's not backwards compatible. And right, so one of the cool things about Phaser is open source. It was mentioned before that I love open source things, and yeah, Phaser is open source. You can raise issues, you can look to see how development is going. Like I said, there are a few times in some like projects I've done, personal projects, where I looked at the source code. Let me see what this function does. Okay, it does this. Okay, no, I understand this instead. And that open source is really good. The community is quite amazing. You get lots of support from it, just on basic websites, on Twitter as well. As compared, like there are other game, I guess, engines and probably game editors like Unity and Unreal and Godot. And why would you want to use Phaser compared to that? Well, I think some of the benefits, open source is definitely against Unity and Unreal, not so much Godot, just also open source game editor. But with Phaser, you can leverage your web development skills because it's literally just a website and JavaScript. You also have this really super quick feedback loop, and I can't love that you write the code in JS file. It's easy to get started with Phaser. You don't have to wait for anything to load. You just open HTML file, slap on the script file from the Phaser CDN, and you just start writing JavaScript. You get going really quickly, and you get feedback from your code extremely quickly as well. So Phaser is pretty awesome for that, and I think those benefits stick out as compared to other larger game editors. And I think for prototyping, people might really enjoy using Phaser because of those features. So, all right, check-in time. So far, so good. All right, so let's go into the demo. Come out of this. So just to make sure, I set up a repo here, github.com/msanatan red versus blue. And you want you to download the files probably as a zip file if you want to code along this demo. We're gonna let's have a little story. So, we have this is VS Code I'm using, use whatever editor you feel happy with. We have this player here, and he's a red ship, and he's a good guy. He's probably an imperialist, and we got these enemies here, probably minding their own business. Like in this game, the enemies won't attack, we'll just attack the enemies because unfortunately the protagonist of the story is, a colonial imperialist. He's probably part of the Space Force that the US President Trump wants to have. So, right, basically we're building a Space Force simulator. That's the game today. We're building a Space Force simulator. Good. So we start off, I want to show you the index.html file. It's really simple. You literally go, we have a standard web page, document, HTML, everything is quite cool. Can I probably zoom in, maybe? Right. Let's zoom in a bit. Right, so we have this here. The title, which is the game title, no fancy CSS, everything's going to be as is. And in case someone doesn't have JavaScript on the browser, we have a div with the ID of app, which just states where our game, this just holds the game element. It will later become the container for the canvas element or WebGL element, which will actually have the where the game running in. And a really easy import of this Phaser library, we got it from the main website. I'll also update the README later with links to where I got the images and where I got these resources. And just our script file, which is currently blank. So we're going to make this game from scratch. Let's have some fun with that. So before we do this is not like, some front-end JavaScript sites, you would just have some front-end code, run an HTML and see it happen. Because we're loading files and JavaScript have some protections for JavaScript files reaching files and very sensible ones, thankfully, and some other restrictions of JavaScript on how it can run. To actually run Phaser, we need to have a server running on it. So in VS Code, I have a live server extension, so I can just click this and run this server live. Actually, I recommend everyone in specs, open your developer console and click on the console tab so we can see, just in case we need to debug, we can have this here and catch some errors. So basically, you need to have a live server running to start off. If you don't have this extension, or probably your editor doesn't have it, well, I recommend leaving your editor. I'm just joking. No flame wars. You can also just use something like Python 3 HTTP server. Close this. So, you can literally just create a server with like Python 3 or something and get the feedback you need as well. So however you do it, just make sure you have a live server to run. Cool. So we pretty much got everything set up and let's get right into it. So go to app.js and the first thing we're going to do is to set up our game object. And we'll start. FYI, it's probably a bit late. I expect you to be familiar with JavaScript, not really any advanced JavaScript, probably basic to intermediate, and I'm going to use some of the ES 2015 features because they just make life a bit simpler. Nothing complex, but it really helps you understand and to follow along. So right, let's get back to it. We're going to create the configurations for our Phaser game object. So constant config under JavaScript object here, type Phaser.auto. So basically, Phaser has some modes. The mode would either be canvas or WebGL. If it's auto, Phaser tries to run in WebGL mode and then falls back to canvas. So 9 times out of 10, you probably want to just keep it as that. Parent just says which div ID we're going to be holding the game in. Width and height, I mean, fairly self-explanatory. I know you guys are pretty sharp. You coders are very intelligent. And what we have right now is the scene. So every bit of code Phaser runs is pretty much contained within a scene. You could think of a scene as, let's just say, yeah.
Just could you maximize your screen?
Oh.
And they're asking you to zoom out a bit more. I guess the image quality is probably not that good.
So make this full screen then. I'll make the full screen.
Yeah, you might want to hide the chat inside too.
Is this a bit better?
Yeah, is chat room, is that any better?
How do the masses vote?
On my end, it's really looking a little bit pixelated.
Okay.
I think that may have to do more with
How about
the upload quality.
is zooming out better then?
One second.
Sure.
Okay, I seen one comment says to zoom in a little bit more. I actually can't see your text very clearly on my end.
Okay, so I'm going to zoom in like this. I apologize if it's blurry. Just to remind people, everything I do will be on GitHub. So if you miss some of the code now, at the end of the demo, we'll upload it. You won't be left behind.
I'll keep zooming in because I'm seeing Matthew saying zooming in is better. So I guess you can zoom in.
Okay,
We'll
cool.
go with
I hope this is okay. I think this is enough for me to get some proper screen real estate. And is it large enough?
Oh, I think he's talking about zooming in via VS Code or something. There's some key combination for zooming in.
Yeah, I just did. I just did it. Or is it not reflecting on your screen?
Okay, I'm seeing positive confirmations. So yeah, you could continue.
Muchas gracias. Thanks for the feedback. If anything else is kind of alarming, just do the same thing, and I'll try to adjust it. So,
Okay, cool.
thanks. All right, so let's come back to the scene. So the scene, as I mentioned before, has the logic for what's going on. So let's think of a game. You have the loading screen, that's a scene. And then you have the menu, so you could choose the game mode, that's a scene. Then you actually have the game itself, well, that's a next scene. So all those things could be a scene. There's Phaser is quite smart, so if I pass in an array, Phaser will be expecting an array of scene objects. If I pass in like a new phaser.scene, Phaser will be like, okay, cool, we got one scene and we could work with this. And Phaser is also pretty cool where you can just put a plain old JavaScript object. If that object has a preload function, a create function, and an update function, basically Phaser will be like, oh, well, you know, looks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And it will create a scene object on the back end for you. So just as an FYI, the reason why I just have preload create an update since ECMAScript 2015, if your key and value has the same name, you can just type it in once. So now that we have that basic config set up, let's actually add some of the objects, some of the functions. I'm gonna copy and paste because, you know, kind of lazy. Apparently Bill Gates said being lazy is good. And I care that people have money and he's rich, but people think that counts for stuff. All right, so basically we shouldn't get an error, massive error, because we actually have functions defined. And to top it all off, we just go and make a new game. There are no pointers here. Cool. So we should have everything we need to have a game started off. I think I need to toggle full screen. Next time I'll try and be a bit more efficient. And right, so with our live preview, we literally have our first Phaser game. It's just a blank screen. That works out quite well for now. I guess if people are trying to debug things, you might want to put the game object in window. So you can also type game and see what's going on, game.scene, and get some data for it. So yeah, you can also just put it in the window object as well. So just so far so good. Hope no one's lost. Just to give you guys an idea of what these three functions are for and how we use them. The preload function is essentially where we load our game assets. It's the first function that Phaser calls when we load instantiating a game or instantiating a scene. So I'm going to use Street Fighter for this analogy for these function explanations. You can imagine like you and your colleague or friend is playing Street Fighter. You select Chun-Li and the colleague selects Ken. And when your game starts, you see Chun-Li on the screen, but you don't see Ken at all. All right, so we could avoid that situation completely by preloading the asset. So before the update cycle runs on the scene, preload Chun-Li and Ken and make sure we can see them on the screen. So after preload is finished, Phaser calls the create function. The create function is basically a space for us to set up the game world. Going back to the Street Fighter analogy, so we have the Chun-Li and the Ken sprites, and in the create function, we're going to put Chun-Li on the left, Ken on the right, and then set the countdown like 3, 2, 1. So the countdown starts at 3. And then the update function has probably the bulk of our logic along with the create function. This function is called at every frame. Every time the game loop runs, the update function is called. So this is where we actually pulling for events, keeping the Street Fighter team. So the person press B after down and up, so fire Hadouken or something. We're just going to pull events and then change the game state in the update function. So now that we kind of have an understanding of what we got so far, the first goal we're going to aim for is to kind of have this Space Force Imperialist on the screen. So we're going to get the red guy there and try to have him move around. So far, decent for time, but let's try to pick it up a notch. Cool, so first things first, in the preload function, we want to load the asset. Load that image. So this will load that image. We give the image a key to be referenced later. We can call our player red, well, the player image red, and then we give it the location. Cool, that's pretty much about it to load the player asset. We can just copy and paste and let's just load the bullets, well, the lasers, and the enemies as well. Cool. So if we go back to here, we see there's absolutely nothing on the screen. And that's perfect. If there was something on the screen, something went horribly wrong, all we should just have is the assets loaded. So to put the player on the screen, we go jump into the create function. And let's have it here. Create a player variable. And then we put this.physics add sprite. And we put the location of the sprite. With this. Ooh, I should make a disclaimer. The code quality reflected in this presentation does not reflect the code quality of my average code, nor any organizations I may be affiliated with. So we add a sprite by saying the location of the sprite and which image it has. And we go back and oh my goodness, it's an error, but this is actually scripted and planned. This is quite a fine error. Basically, it says we can't add physics as undefined. So the first thing, before we can actually get sprites on the system, we should probably add the physics system. Fix this. let's go back into our config. Sorry. And then we have physics. Physics is an object. Default arcade. Then we can put arcade. Next object, gravity, false. Boom. So basically, we're saying like, okay, phaser, we want to have a physics system in place. The default system is arcade. So phaser has probably 3 or 4 different physics systems, and you can tweak them to get the right feel and movement for your game objects. But arcade is by far the simplest engine, and for our purposes, we're just going to use it to help us move around our players and enemies and manage some collisions. We'll also put gravity to false because since it's space, they don't have any gravity in this hyper-realistic space force simulator. All right, and before I jump into it, I want to shed some light into the coordinate system. So and this function is x and y. And so yeah, here we go. All the red guys there. So usually in high school or secondary school, we have the coordinate system here. Your origin will be at the center. For x to increase, you go up. For y for x to increase, you go across to the right. For y to increase, you go up. In phaser and in pretty much every game engine that I've used for 2D games, the origin is at here. This top left corner, 0, 0. Your x increases as you go to the right, and your y increases as you go down. So just keep that in mind. Your y value is greater when you go down, and your x value is greater when you go to the right. So good. That's fine. We can see our red player there. I'm thinking we want to probably define our player variable outside of the create function because we don't want to have block or function scoping on the create function that would not allow us to use it in the update. So players define outside here so that create and update can both use it. So far, so good. Hope everyone's following. And now we got this here. We want to actually kind of make us be able to use it to move left and right. So now we got to go back to the create function. You got to update pretty soon. Cursors. Create a new variable called cursors, and this that inputs. Create cursor keys. And we should do the same thing and let cursors be defined up here as well. And now in our update function, we'll have we're going to check if the cursor has been moved. So cursors, so cursors like cursor keys. But if your left button is down, clear.body.set velocity x to be minus 200. Otherwise, right is down. The set velocity will be 200 instead. So if it's left, you kind of go 200 to the left, and if it's right, go increase the x value, make it more positive, and go about 200 speed. So here we go. We can go left or right. You notice something weird if you keep going left and right, doesn't really stop. It just kind of keeps going. So we can do something simple with that. And by default, in every update, the velocity could be 0. This way, Yep, you hold it down, you go left, you go right, and it stops when you're not pressing anything. That's pretty cool. And not too much time, we kind of have something going. You heard my voice quite a good bit, but we already have a player moving around on the screen. So that's pretty positive. One quick thing, if we keep going left here, we'll kind of leave the world. The same thing if we keep going right. Yeah, so that's pretty bad. We're going to do is just do some quick boundaries. So see if I remember this. I think in the create function, we can just add player.set collide world bounds to true. So that should be about right. My library will just reloaded, and yep, I cannot escape the physical world I'm currently in. So in not probably what 50 lines of code where you got a player moving around on the screen. So that's pretty positive. Again, Phaser is really quick at these things. So what we're going to do now is to add the enemies to the screen. The enemies will be a bit different. So we want to have 3 enemies, 3 blue guys here, 3 blue ships. And instead of adding a sprite 3 times, Phaser has this really cool thing called a sprite group. In a sprite group, you can kind of automate how much you add. You also allow Phaser to kind of share properties. So if a sprite group collides with an object, then fine, every sprite will have that behavior. So sharing the properties and behaviors is why we should use sprite groups for when we have common multiple objects available. Right, so it's perfect. We want sprite groups to be available. Sprite groups would be called enemies, and you want it available in both the create and update functions later. So let's put it on top here. So it'll be available to the entire app. And let's add this right quickly. Enemies, this, that physics, that add, the group. And we pass an object. The key is the image that we loaded. So key is blue because we loaded the image and called it blue in the preload section. Repeat 2. So basically, we want Phaser to create, when we put repeats 2, we tell Phaser create a sprite immediately, and then also create 2 more sprites just like it. It's a pretty nifty one, set x, y. So the set x, y. So basically, Phaser has an idea of what the first x and y values are. And then we kind of step to tell Phaser, okay, separate these beautiful, lovely sprites by the step. So separate each enemy by a third, roughly a third of the screen. Fine. And let's check it out. And nice, we got enemies on the screen. So far so good. We got a player and we got the enemies to play against. So that's pretty cool. We now going to kind of want to make the enemies move around. And yeah, it's actually pretty simple to describe that behavior in Phaser. So as we define it, we kind of go back right here to the enemy section and add a couple other properties. So before we call the function set velocity x, we just say we're going to keep it really simple. Basically, the enemies are going to start moving to the left, and when they hit the world boundaries, they're going to move to the right. When they hit the world boundaries, they move back to the left. Nothing too complex. So set velocity x, we set the velocity to minus 250. So instead of set collide world bounds, we set in the property collide world bounds and put it to true. And lastly, we're going to put bounce x. So when you collide will bounce and you hit it, when you collide and those will bounce, you're going to bounce back with a value of 1, which means maintain the same properties. So we go back here and we see that our code is doing just that. The enemies are moving left to right. We got quite a lot of movement already, and this is pretty cool. So far, so good. Watching the time. So there's not too much more remaining, but let's see if I can power through it. What we want to do next is get to the lasers. So, and we can shoot. Let's define the property on top here. Laser. We're going to create a new sprite group for lasers. And we're going to limit, so we're going to have a max size. This max size will be 3 to say that we can't have more than 3 lasers on screen at a time. And then we can come to our update function. So what we want to do is every time the user presses spacebar, they'll be able to fire a laser. We want to be able to press spacebar like probably just once. So instead of like movement where we can left is down, kind of checks if left is being held down. We just want to see if we can, just fire 1 shot of lasers if we press it once. So phaser, input, report, just down, is this function. Okay, so it's a space. So basically check, hey, the spacebar press, is it just on once? What we're going to do is run the shoot laser function. It takes player laser as the first argument. The player, the image of the laser that we loaded, the preload section, and let's just say the velocity of the laser. And right now we don't have a shoot laser function. Cursor is not defined, cursor space. We don't have a shoot laser, so it shows an error. So right below this, we can add that right really quickly. Shoot laser. Shoot laser, as we see here, takes a sprite group. Right. A sprite is special with us, but velocity. Why? And shoot laser is actually quite simple. We're going to take the sprite group and we're going to create a new sprite within the group. The first parameter is essentially the exposition of the sprite of the new laser object. And we take the exposition from the exposition of our sprite. So the laser's exposition will be based on the center of our actual player, the red ship. The Y position will just pretty much be the same. Just make it a bit clearer.
Hey, Marcus.
Hello?
Yeah, I just want to interrupt for a second to bring a brief message from our sponsor. No, I was just gonna say, we have like 1 minute left, but I'm not seeing much comments coming through, so you could continue. And if I see any questions popping up, I'll just interrupt and ask you.
Oh, okay, cool. I can happily listen. Perfect.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And we're nearly done. We're close, so it's all good. So, right, so basically you create a laser sprite in the laser sprite body, set the velocity, do everything you need to do. And then, oh, it's one small error there. Velocity. The function. And now we have a shoot laser function. If we press space, laser image is not defined because it's called sprite image. We can shoot lasers. Great. And we get an error because we did define the lasers to have a max size of 3. So we actually kind of need to address that. And we'll do that in 2 ways. First things first is to say that if you got lasers, children, so sprites inside a group are called children. So if you're, let's say, any more than 3 children in this group, you can't shoot any lasers. But we also need to do a bit more work than that. And what we gotta do is check and see if any of the lasers have left the screen. And if they left the screen, we should probably destroy that object. So for each. Okay, thank you, VS for that extremely weird code completion.
Okay, I have some questions, so you'll just give me signal when I can ask them.
Oh, you can fire it. I'll try to finish this as you go ahead.
Okay. I actually have a question as well, but I'll ask my own last. First question that I'm now seeing was retracted. Kendall wanted to know if you were using phaser command line CLI.
No. For the purpose of this demo, I tried to contribute to the CLI actually, but for this demo, no. This is just pure phaser.
Okay. The next question from him again is, I used phaser 2. It was pretty chunky and debugging was a pain.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do any unit testing with phaser? How was that experience? How was that?
Unit testing with anything which has state management kind of away on non-functional form is a bit painful. That being said, it's not too impossible. Most of my unit testing would have been to functions I added, logical functions I added, which I try to make stateless. But to debug the actual player actions, I'm not there yet, to be honest.
Okay. Next question, I believe you're familiar with Akeem Filbert. What are some considerations that need to be made if you want to have the game work on mobile? In brackets or in parentheses, sorry, the cursors, lib handles, key translations, that's a question. Optimizing for higher screen resolutions with 2x, etc.
Right, so good question too. Basically, for mobile, we have phaser has the last update of phaser actually has input which really caters for mobile. So you can actually add touchscreen objects on the screen to move around the player. And what people normally do is that they have the keyboard, they have a generic input manager that abstracts away from whether there's a keyboard or the touch input manager. And they use that as the backend. So they look for random keys from the user, and whichever one it fires for, let that change the state of the game. And then it also has a skill manager in Phaser to actually look at how the assets on the screen is actually displayed for your screen. Those are probably a bit more complex for this scope, but they're actually there. And people do a lot of Phaser games for web, mobile, and desktop usage. And if you want to make a mobile app out of it, people use Godot as a wrapper around it and do lots of testing to see how well it works on the phones.
Oh, interesting. I'm actually trying to invest more time into Cordova. So a follow-up question by Kendall. I don't remember how to pronounce your last name properly. I'm going to say Arno. Forgive me if I get it wrong. To add to Akeem's questions, he's asking about the screen size and responsive attributes.
Right. So I think I'll probably detour a bit. It's a skill manager.
Google it.
Yeah, I know. No, trust me. This is like, all this is old. To learn Phaser, you have to really look at the resources they have, which is mostly examples. This is some old documentation. It's not the version tree, but generally those things, all properties, physical properties, can be scale and graphical ones. So I'm not too sure. I don't think version 3 has as comprehensive a scale manager as version 2. But when you do scale properties on a very arbitrary level, I can literally set the scale of my sprite image to like half it, or depending on the dimensions of the screen. And basically, what I'll do is also, after setting the image of the object, the sprite, I will set the physical bounds of the sprite to be that small to match it. So that is one kind of guerrilla way to kind of get that done. You set the scales for both the image and the physical properties of each asset.
Okay, and my question,
Yeah.
okay, Kendall, just a follow up on Kendall's question. He's saying he thought that it was something new to Phaser 3 where that is concerned.
No, it's been there for a while. It's been revamped. The API has been revamped in Phaser 3, but it's been there for a while.
Okay, I just want to ask, I was actually going to ask about the physics engine, but I think, well, probably you could give a little explanation of that for people who might not understand what that's about.
Right.
And while you explain that, I'm thinking here that you're telling me like this library ships with, you know how the action script libraries, a whole bunch of stuff for physics and whatnot. So this library ships with all that already inside it.
Pretty much. Yep. So basically, the library got in version 3, it got a lot more modular. There are ways to import it without importing physics engines and make it code leaner. But it does come with everything like that. It literally manages the games aspect of it. So it is not just a wrapper around HTML5 APIs. It has different physics engine, I believe 4. I think there's matter physics, impact physics, P2 physics, and arcade physics. Arcade physics are just a very simple one to kind of get you going. The other ones like matter is really good for emissions and particles. Impact has a lot more detail than arcade and gives you a lot more flexibility on movement and linear curves, for example. And basically, the physics we're using right now, the velocity is what actually moves the player. Usually, when you have physics, you don't just set the player's x and y values, but you tell it to move towards a certain direction. So this is really good. Let's say like I was making a running game and I was holding right, I can increase the velocity over time and make the player run faster. So the physics engine is quite convenient. And just to show you the code again, I believe it was here. When we use body, that object pretty much contains all the physical properties of your sprite. So the physics engine for arcade uses this body object that contains all the properties, where it is, how it's affected by gravity, for example, what speed it's going at right now. What I can probably do, because of time, is keep answering some questions, and the last bit to have in this game was actually letting the lasers collide with the ships, and then having you have like a win message at it. And that's pretty much it. It's probably about 20 more lines of code. But what I can do after this presentation is just pretty much finish it out, put it on GitHub, and put some comments in so everyone can see it.
Yeah, that was like a minute left now. I was actually trying to follow along with the tutorial, but from the time you started using set velocity and all that, it became difficult to keep following along someone at chat. But I must say this was actually pretty encouraging. I knew it would be. That's why I wanted to try and promote the session as much as possible, because I know, especially for the younger generation, game development tends to be, we talk about into you. This was actually much better than I expected, Marcus. Not saying that I had a low bar for you, but
I mean, Jesus, really, that's on a goddamn. But yeah,
I expected it to be good, and it was actually excellent. I knew you would show up, and I give you an A++ for this. It's a compliment.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, this was really good.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah, just like I said, if anyone has any questions and you see me on Facebook or Google Hangouts or Twitter, you could definitely reach out for me for more physics questions. I will finish this game. I'll probably put a bit more in the README of all the little parts I couldn't demo. so that you can follow along with it. And I really encourage you to get out there. I can give any README. I also plan to put some resources for you to check out so you can really kickstart some more serious phase of development. I definitely want you guys to be interested and excited about it because I really am excited about the tech.
So please give the people if you like to, your social media.
Yeah. You can literally stalk me on the web very easily. Just look for M Sanatan, like literally anything M Sanatan. You can find me. Literally Google M Sanatan. You will find my GitHub. You will find my website, which has M Sanatan. You will find my Instagram. You don't need to add me there. Like really, don't. For Twitter, some really evil person took.
It's Marcus. I think you have on Twitter.
Evil person took away M Sanatan on Twitter. So I know they're trying to blackmail me later if I get famous and rich. So you have to look for Marcus Sanatan on Twitter. But I'm pretty responsive here, and like Phaser on Twitter is extremely responsive too. So you definitely want to go on Twitter. And I'm
okay.
HIO HTML5GameDevs.com. So yeah.
Let me just sneak in this last question. I saw somebody post here.
Nothing.
How difficult is it a game with Phaser?
Oh, sorry?
How difficult is it to make a multiplayer game with Phaser?
You see, you would think it's a bit difficult, but let me show you. You can just go on the website and literally right here, there's a tutorial for multiplayer, real-time multiplayer games with Socket.io and Phaser. It is not that difficult.
Okay.
People use it with Firebase as well to have a kind of cloud backend to store high scores and do other multiplayer objects, but it's really not difficult, and there's a free tutorial right here to get you started with developing games with Phaser and using Socket.io to make a multiplayer.
All right, and with that, thank you very much, Marcus, for this excellent session. You were basically the first actual session of the event, and I think you started off strong, and you're going to have everybody else shaking their boots because they're going to have to basically match this. But I'm sure they will be excellent as well too. So thank you for coming out. Thank everybody who viewed the stream. It's recorded, so after the fact, you could share the link all over the place. Like Marcus said, you could reach out to him and whatnot. For those of you who utilize Facebook still, Marcus is one of the moderators / admins on Caribbean Developers, so you could also catch him there. You could check out all his stuff on Github and whatnot. And yes, thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate everyone coming out. Have a good day, everyone. And more sessions.
Oh, and don't forget that we have another session this afternoon with Obika titled Static Code Analysis. For those of you all who are into security, you can check that out. I think it's at 5 o'clock this afternoon. So yeah, thanks a lot. Take care. Have a good day.